Hey everyone, Rani here. The goal of this channel is to interview 1,000 of Australia's top entrepreneurs and business leaders. In this episode, I sit down, talk, and interview Sean Hall. So, for anyone who may not know who Sean Hall is, he's a TEDx speaker. He's also a mental health advocate and CEO of human performance consultancy Energx. Sean works with high performing companies to build and sustain their competitive advantage. Sean works with clients to get immediate results by using an agile approach that practically connects mental well being, productivity, creativity, and inclusion. Sean's experience working with thousands of employees for companies like Facebook, Unilever, and Deloitte has led him to develop the X Factor. What is the X Factor? It's an employee experience framework to attract and develop the best talent in the market, create innovative customer experiences, and deliver superior commercial outcomes. Sean's pro bono work includes being a founding member of the Mentally Healthy Change Group, tackling the epidemics of anxiety and depression in the creative industry, head of well-being for disability startup Accelerator Remarkable, and mentor to youth-driven anti-bullying movement Project Rocker. Before we start, please consider subscribing to the channel to stay up to date with all the amazing and cool episodes that we have in store in the next few weeks. Comfy? You asked me earlier if I'm comfy.
Yeah.
Are you comfy?
Yeah, I'm comfy.
How do you
I'm
feel
comfy.
about the seats?
Yeah. I feel like I would easily have a nap in this one.
Yeah. Does it feel like how does that compare to like a beanbag?
I feel more supported.
Yeah, okay. It's a lot more firm
Yeah,
than a
it's just
beanbag.
been upright. I like being upright.
Yeah. So when I was starting out the podcast, I had to figure out what furniture and all
Yeah.
that stuff. And so I found some really cool chairs from an Australian online store. I'm not going to mention names. And I had them delivered. And when I brought them to the office here, I sat on the first one. I put it together. All you had to do is just assemble the legs, right? And as soon as I sat down, I heard that loudest squeaky voice, like, I was like, what? I didn't pay that much for those chairs. Like, I was like, in no shape or form can I have these chairs in the imagine like being in a podcast and every time you guys moves, I was like, there's no way.
Yeah.
So I went to Harvey Norman, God bless Harvey Norman, and I found these chairs, and the rest is history.
Anything where you have to put it together yourself is not fun.
Yeah. Sean, thank you so much for making it here. I really appreciate you coming in. It's a pleasure, and I for everyone who's watching, we connected on LinkedIn. I learned a lot about what you've been doing for the last, God knows how many years.
5 years.
5 years.
Or if you
count all the other parts.
Yeah, definitely.
And I felt like I had to have you on the show, so you kindly accepted. So thank you so much.
Thank you for reaching out.
So we got a lot of things to unpack today, and I think the first thing that we should probably cover is, how did your journey start? I know you obviously spent a lot of time working in Telstra, in the marketing side, leading, I guess a few marketing functions, could call it that.
Yeah, different portfolios. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And you eventually made the transition to HR. So I'll let you, just share with us, how did that all go?
Yeah. So so I spent just over 7 years at Telstra.
Yep.
As you said, two big jobs. The first big job was head of brand strategy and marketing. I was responsible for the brand transformation that happened from the old Telstra to the new Telstra, essentially. So that impacted about 16 million customers, about 80,000 employees and partners, and the brand was worth when I moved into my next role was worth about $9 billion. And so that was an extraordinary experience. There's not many roles that you get for any marketer, really, even globally, when you think about it, that enable you to have the opportunity to really touch every person in that country in some way, or have an impact.
Of course.
And so great challenges, but also amazing experiences. And the reason then that I did a career pivot at Telstra into HR, which is a bit unusual for a marketer, was that I was KPI'd on every brand experience that Telstra had. So that included call centers as much as stores, as much as the marketing and ads. And I went and spent some time in a call center and realized how little or no control I essentially had over that experience, but I was still KPI'd on it. And that led me to the belief, essentially, that your employee experience or your customer experience is a product of your employee experience. And so I then was looking, I guess, for an opportunity in my career. I was also on a leadership development program. And I pitched to the chief HR officer at the time and said, hey, I believe I could actually have a bigger impact inside the organization by applying marketing thinking to the employee context. And so the first strategic head of employee experience role was created, and I was there in that role, really responsible for designing culture strategy for the 40,000 employees that we had at that time. And I really explain the roles. I feel like HR and marketing often have very similar roles. Your job is to deeply understand humans and influence their behavior in a positive way. So I was doing that in both jobs.
It's not, like you said, it's not quite often that you'd hear about someone who, especially someone like yourself, who was quite successful and accomplished in the marketing world, working for, a very big brand like Telstra, say, hey, I'm just gonna change, like, my career. That's one of those things that have to happen when you have one of those deep, profound moments. It could come from definitely not in your case, but it could come sometimes from frustration. Someone might feel like they haven't reached what they thought they would in a certain career, or it could come from a very positive place. In your example, where you had a look and you found, wow, okay, all what I've learned in, my career in marketing, a lot of it, if not all, can be applied to working with people, but rather than focusing on customers in a very direct way. Like in marketing, you would go into the HR world and focus on how the people who work for the organization, how their experience is very important, and how can I impact that so that it can then go back to the customer.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And like there was the positive parts to that. It's funny you should bring that up, because there were actually some personal things as well that really led me to feel like the timing for that was right. And I sort of talk about really, I guess, this next part, I guess, which was around my mental health at the time, as like my sort of second coming out, right? So I when I was leading that big brand transformation, I was doing ridiculous hours, right? It was a very pivotal moment in my career. I would leave work at 2 a.m. I'd be back at 6, but no one was asking me to do that, right? But there are perfectionist behaviors. I was a yes guy, didn't know how to ask for help. And it all sort of reached, I guess, a tipping point one day when, about a month before we actually did the big finale, the big launch, I found myself in the fancy men's accessories part of David Jones one day, and that was a bit unusual for me. I don't buy $1,000 man bags or $150 pocket squares. I don't even like to wear sleeves,
As you can clearly see.
And the other reason it was unusual is that day I actually had no idea how I got there.
Mm.
I was sort of like quite dazed and confused, and uh, if another customer had sort of seen me, they would have thought that things were a bit off,
Yep.
essentially. And if you talk to a psychologist about
Mm.
that scenario, they like get you to the hospital, right?
Really?
Because you're essentially on the verge of a nervous breakdown,
Wow. Okay. Of
right? And because I'd just been pushing
course.
it, and so when I was actually looking for ways to get myself well again,
Mm.
I couldn't find what really resonated with me, because a lot of the men's mental health stuff, and even today, really the majority of it focuses on the extremes
Mm.
around depression, suicide, anxiety, addiction. I didn't have any of those things.
Yeah.
I literally, and even with burnout, right? They talk about cynicism. I loved my job too much.
Mm.
That was the problem, and I
Yeah.
didn't know how to say no.
Yeah.
And I wasn't aware of all the little decisions I was making that led me to essentially have what I call an energy crisis,
Yep.
where I was just running on empty. My batteries were flat,
Fumes.
and
Yep.
and it just and I needed to make some changes.
Right.
And so that's really led me to do what I was the starting point of leading to what I do today, and why I focus on energy, because conversations around energy aren't as stigmatized. They're not as scary,
Mm.
And therefore, I talk about what I teach now, and what I had to learn for myself as energy intelligence, which is simply about understanding the decisions that you make that energize you versus deplete you.
Yep.
Right? It's that simple.
Yep.
Like every decision we make is either going to do one of those two things. It can't be nothing. It's like laws of physics apply, right? And
Absolutely.
and that's the simplest thing that I teach people is, sort of dress it up a little bit, and I'll say, you can either make an energy vampire decision, which is going to suck something out of you, which like not sleeping enough, not nourishing yourself, letting your inner critic beat you up. They're all decisions that we make. And then when you're an energy vampire to yourself, you're often going to be an energy vampire to other people too. We'll be guilty of giving our worst energy to the people we care about the most.
Yep.
Or you can choose to make an Energx decision, which is about expanding your own energy and the energy of others.
Yep.
And that's essentially what I teach people today. I learned to do that for myself. I call myself the chief Energx.
I like
right.
Yep.
And that's essentially,
I don't think anyone has that title.
Yeah.
No
well, I try to, like, this is where my marketing stuff comes in, right? Like I want to bring it back to that positivity around that. And that's where positive psychology and neurosciences has such a big impact on the way of what I teach and what I learn myself.
Yeah. We were joking just earlier about that, about the title, but I wouldn't be surprised if, who knows, maybe a few years down the road, you have, just like you have CTO, CMO, whatever, all the big organizations will start to, and you could be the one who bring that movement.
Yeah.
You have chief, well, that will kind of like go conflict with the CEO. So it'd be chief energy officer.
Yeah.
Right. So they'll have to find something else for the CEO.
It could be part of their job as well, right? Actually, one of my clients, the CEO of Unilever in Australia and New Zealand, after I did some work with them this year, she actually wrote to the whole all of their employees and said that she was going to like include chief energy officer as part of her job description, and that was a big endorsement, as you said. Like it is a bit of a movement in a way, right? Because I think we can all be Energx, and that's essentially what and I think that inherently we all want to be Energx. We all want to give good vibes to people. We all want to be kind, and it's only when we're depleted, often by either what we don't know or just bad habits, that we end up being an energy vampire. And so I really like, this is essentially what I teach people in every single workshop. Is it's that simple thing: just be an Energx. Ask yourself at the end of each day, how many of the decisions did I make were energy vampire versus Energx decisions, and then start to shift that balance over time.
Of course, I'm sure there's a lot to it, but it all starts with awareness, right? Understanding,
100%.
like you said, what is adding to my energy and what is taken away from it.
Yeah.
And you touched on something I find quite interesting and important, which is going back to, what got you to the point of almost like a breakdown. not trying to be hard on large corporations, but it tends to happen quite a bit in
Yeah.
large corporations, and you might agree with that, um, or disagree. You probably know more than me, but from my personal experience, it tends to happen a lot in bigger companies because um, you just go in as someone who's ambitious, and a lot of people tend to take a lot on their plate and say yes to things more than they can do. And like you said, not find or seek help. Why?
Mm.
Because I want to prove that I did this. I was able to, achieve X, Y, and Z, because that will kind of reflect on me when the time comes to getting promoted. Or so you don't necessarily take on things that you're passionate about. And I find, and I feel like I'm getting in some murky waters because this is your territory, and I might be saying something probably not very correct, but I feel, and my personal view is that passion correlates quite a lot with energy in terms of how high or low it is. So if you're doing
Absolutely.
something that you love and you're passionate about,
Yep.
you could work 2-3 more hours a day,
Yep.
and you might end up with more energy than working 2-3 hours less, but doing something you hate just to please others or to earn something.
Passion is a big part of energy intelligence, right?
Yeah.
So we talk about 4 Fs.
Yeah.
Fuel, fire, feeling, and focus. So fuel is the stuff that we most commonly associate with well-being.
Yeah.
Sleep, nutrition, exercise, recovery, and they're the things that, when everything else, is chaotic, they're still the things we have the most influence over. What time you choose to go to bed, what you choose to put in your mouth, those are things you have the most control of. Whether you choose to go outside and get some fresh air and move.
Yeah, the basics.
They're the basics, right? And so we're energized when we sleep well and look after ourselves physically. The second F is fire, which is what we're talking about here. Fire, yeah. So that fire in our belly, that passion, knowing that we're good at something and that those strengths have a meaningful impact, that fills up our cup, right? We can sense that, and sometimes that doesn't have to be monetary. It can be. We should be getting meaning in lots of different areas of our life, not just work. But what I will say as a warning to people is that lead with fire for too long and you will burn out. Right? You need to support yourself with the other Fs to do that, and that's basically what I was doing. I was leading with passion. This amazing opportunity. And then feeling is about your relationship with yourself, first of all. Do I have a kind, generous, loving, compassionate relationship with myself as the basis for strong, healthy, energizing relationships with others? So we're energized when we can be our own cheerleader versus our own critic. And then the final F is focus, which is literally, how do I create space for the stuff that energizes me whilst I remove or reframe the stuff that depletes me.
Right.
And that gets really practical. Like, I teach people literally how to manage their diaries around focus. And really that comes back to value. How do we create the most value in our lives for ourselves? And a lot of people aren't clear how they create value for themselves personally as well as professionally.
Are you're probably familiar with Elon Musk? Right? Everyone is, right?
Yes. Yes.
Like,
might have heard of it, one or two things he does.
Yeah. So I find that quite interesting because he's notorious for his work schedule.
Yes.
And I think he mentioned a few times that he was on the brink also of or he might have had nervous breakdown.
Yeah.
Right. Especially when he was trying to get Tesla.
Yeah.
Up because it was about to go bankrupt. And he used to sleep in the factory till 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, much like you used to. You used to go to bed at 2 to wake up at 6. He used to get 2-3 hours of sleep every day. I'm sure that's not the case anymore. But what would you advise someone like him? And then then you take it down to, people that are CEOs of other companies or even like mid-level and just managers who are trying to get things done. And I'm sure this is a very open-ended question. There's a lot to it. But what's the first step that you take with someone who's working in a workplace and they're just overwhelmed?
Yeah. So thank you for inviting me to talk to Elon. So look, and this comes back actually to a point you made before as well, is that ultimately the question we always have to ask ourselves is who's responsible for what, right? As if I'm responsible for my life, you're responsible. I'm not responsible for yours. I'm not responsible for the decisions that you make around your well-being and your energy. I can share my knowledge with you, and I can say these are my recommendations based on what I know. However, I can't make you make those choices, right? Ultimately, you're going to make those choices. If I was your leader, there's a different level of responsibility, right? Because I know that if I don't enable you with the skills that ultimately allow you to sustain your performance, to be at your creative best, to do work that you're proud of, to be clear of how you add value, then that's going to have a big impact on your well-being.
Yep.
Right. So I have a role to play there in keeping you well. And in part of that role, I also have a responsibility to role model that. Right. And so I remember when Elon was coming out and sort of, it's almost like, and this is the definitely the thing with startup culture, right? This hustle culture, which basically heroes this idea that we don't sleep enough and that we put everything else. Like I remember seeing a post on Sydney Startups where some guy was complaining that, because he'd had a baby, that he wasn't able to put so much. And I'm like, Father of the Year material, right? Like this is the things we need to remember what's really important. Often what way I sort of sum things up of what I say I help people have more energy for what matters, right? So what really matters.
That hustle culture, I think, is becoming too much, putting the emphasis on working. And look, I work a lot as well.
Yeah.
But I think the hustle trend or the hustle culture of work, and it almost becomes something that people take pride in to work more than they should.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, it makes people focus on the wrong things.
It does. And I think like there's a number of things going on. One is like, and I'm going to get this bit controversial considering this picture on the wall.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. But I really think we need to find new heroes, right? I think we've got to stop making heroes a privileged
For everyone watching the next episode,
let's be down. Like, we can add to them, right?
Yeah.
We can add bits and pieces. I think, you can be your own hero by taking bits and pieces that inspire you from other people. But, I think we should stop making heroes of privileged white people. There's a lot of other people out there that are way more resilient, way more inspiring than privileged white people.
For me, so I'm not a privileged white person. I'm not a white person, and I don't look at white people as more privileged than me. I don't see anyone as more privileged than anyone. I just think when I was looking at and this is a bit off topic, but since you mentioned, I'm sure other people might think, oh, why do you have them? I also have on the other side, I have other people. So you got Kevin Hart. Definitely not a white person. Joe Rogan, I mean, you can classify him as white, but he comes from Italian, so perhaps Gary Vee, I think so. Yeah, I think everyone else is white. Tony Robbins and Seth Godin. But for me, I looked at who are the people that I aspire to that have achieved things that are quite worthy and have impacted the world. And these are the ones that I connected with from that perspective. But I do agree 100% that there are a lot of people out there that have done tremendous things. And my memory is failing me right now, but I do believe the CEO of Pepsi, for example, a lady, I can't remember.
I know who you're talking about, and her name escapes me right now as well.
Her journey, she started as a janitor. I was reading her story, and I was like, wow, starting from being a janitor to the CEO of Pepsi is just crazy. Anyway, we went sideline. I think one of the most interesting things for me is the whole idea of energy and how it links to creativity. Because I'm in marketing. You were and still are in marketing. You have a lot of
wearing every hat at the moment.
Yeah, you wear a ton of hats. And I always think about that. I always think about the connection between, because no one can dispute that creativity is one of the most important things when it comes, especially when it comes to marketing, right? we can go on tangents and talk about, okay, creativity and innovation. Innovation is more so when it comes to product development and tech and, all that stuff. But if you just look at marketing, um, creativity is just super important. And I used to look at when I used to work for companies, because now I work for myself. And back then I was more stressed than when I'm working for myself, just by the virtue of doing things that I choosing what I work on,
Yeah,
just allowed me, and adding that level of passion allowed me to be less stressed.
definitely.
And I see that creativity increasing, and I always thought that stress is a major inhibitor to creativity.
So it's different types of stress, right?
Yeah.
So the reason I got obsessed with this, right? Obviously, I see myself as a creative person as well. One of my favorite quotes on creativity is from Steve Jobs, which is simply that creativity is connecting things,
Yeah.
right? And often what people focus on is the connect part. It's actually the things. It's the diversity of things, and that's why Apple talk about inclusion inspiring innovation, right? It's diversity of things that allows you to identify different connections, different, and therefore those surface different ideas. Why I got really, I guess, into focusing on the links with mental well-being is because a lot of my clients at Energx are creative clients, advertising agencies, media agents, PR, client side marketers as well. I'm very lucky and grateful to work with some incredible brands.
Yep.
And we did. I'm a founding member of a mentally healthy change group for the creative industries, and we have done 2 mental health studies into the industries over the last 2 years, and the latest study came back 56% of creative people are experiencing mild to severe symptoms of depression. Wow. And 52% for anxiety. And those are almost double the national averages. And we had to ask ourselves, why that is. It's a complex question, obviously, to ask. But one of the roles that I've played in that group, and there's about 20 of us that are volunteers in this change group.
Yeah.
The role that I've sort of played is because I'm the person that's out there selling, essentially, putting a value on well-being. I sort of took the lead in terms of what's the business case around this, right? And so one of the things I wanted to explore was I thought, well, how does our mental well-being, our mental health, ill health, specifically depression and anxiety, impact the creative process?
Yep.
And so as part of that, I've been collaborating with Professor David Allais from the University of Sydney School of Psychology. Yep. And what I've learned from David, and we're just sort of starting.
Shout out to Professor David.
Shout out to Professor David. We actually just did a co-presented a lecture to the closing keynote for the EduTech International Congress just yesterday.
Is this out?
So I can definitely get you a link to that. And what we were talking about in that context was learning as a competitive advantage. Right. And this is where creativity comes into play as well, right? Yep. Learning is required for creativity. You have to be curious.
Of course.
Right. And so what we found is that essentially the brain lights up in 2 different ways, 2 different networks for the creative process. So our divergent thinking, the network that lights up in our brain is called the default mode network, the DMN. For convergent thinking, it's our executive attention network, EAN. Right. Okay. And literally when you scan the brain, they look completely different the way they light up. Right. What we know is that the DMN, so our divergent thinking, is crushed by anxiety. Right. We're required to go into our DMN state. We're required to feel safe, psychologically safe. We need to be relaxed. And, so if you're anxious, you're hypervigilant, like you're in fear, essentially. And therefore your blinkers come down. So
narrow tunnel,
you will not do divergent thinking. And then the way that depression impacts the creative process is on the convergent side, where depression essentially sucks the life out of you, right? Sucks the energy out of you. And therefore you actually could still, and if we think about the the stereotype of the tortured artist or something like that. You
Yeah.
know, you can still be very creative, but the best ideas can get left on the table, right? Because the convergent part is the hard work.
Mm.
You know, especially if you're in a marketing or creative role, you got to sell that idea.
Mm.
You got to bring that idea to life. You got to collaborate, like all of those things.
Yeah.
When you're depressed, you just like, who can be
Yeah.
F to do that?
Yeah. Of
Right.
course.
And so when we think of that, more than 1 and 2 people
Yeah.
are experiencing those, and potentially both at the same time.
Mm.
That is a big problem for the product.
Yeah.
Right. Because of the
course.
product being creativity. And what I believe, well, actually, it's not even what I believe. The World Economic Forum each year puts out the new emerging skills that are required for the future of jobs.
Yes.
Right. And right now, 8 of those 10, the top 10, have a creative thread through them.
Wow.
Whether it is creativity itself and innovation, originality, or whether it's things like learning or technology design or emotional intelligence, which is a cool form of creativity in itself. For me, like being able to read a room, you know, and work out how to bring people together, you know, that's a creative process, problem solving, you know, all of those things. And so, you know, the world needs creativity more than it's ever needed it. You think of all the big problems, the big, wicked, complex problems we're facing, and why this is so important with mental well-being, and really the word I like to use is capacity, is that all of those creative skills, they're human skills, and so our ability to be creative, to be emotionally intelligent, to solve problems, to be empathetic and understand and learn, be agile, all of that sort of stuff isn't so powerfully negatively impacted when we're depleted, anxious, depressed, burned out, all of those things. And so this is why I think like there's a real opportunity as well when we think about where we need to invest in ourselves, in our careers, is that if we can invest in understanding how to build our capacity, right, to have a full tank of gas, charge our batteries, that is going to power all our skills, power our creativity, help us stand out, power our intelligence, essentially. And so I sort of talk about this, what I call this performance paradox, right, where I say there is no intelligence without energy, right? We make really dumb decisions when we're depleted, but there's no energy without intelligence. Right. We need to know how to energize ourselves, and that's sort of the role that we try to play.
Fascinating. When back in the day, I worked for a global brand, Heineken, and they had a KPI, which was the rate of innovation. Excuse me. So what that was about, it was about how many products or how many new beverage products that they can come up with every single year. Versus how many they have already. So if you have 100 products and you came up with 3 new products this year, so your rate of innovation is 3%. So I used to measure, so that's one way you can measure creativity. In in that case, it's innovation, pure innovation from a marketing perspective. And I'm not sure, because I haven't seen since then, because I worked for a few other companies after that, which certainly did not have anything around measuring, at least to my knowledge, around creativity and innovation. I wonder if that's becoming a thing where you're not looking at innovation, because I'm sure a lot of companies definitely measure that, but you're looking at, and I know it's hard to quantify, but look at the creative power of an organization. And perhaps one of the ways to measure that is to look at, if you have 1,000 people in the company, how many new ideas came on the table versus how many people we have.
And so I think there's a couple of ways that I've been looking at it, right? Because one of the challenges of what I've come to fail at, actually, a lot of times, up until where I feel like I'm sort of getting close now with the responses I'm getting, is that is communicating the value, right, of what we do. Um, and this is always one of the trickiest things, I think, for an entrepreneur as well. And a lot of that comes back to actually thinking about, how do I speak the language, right, of that a C-suite, a CFO, a CEO is going to respond to.
Mm.
And so when we think about what the role of an exec team is in a board, essentially it's about value, right? They're either protecting value or they're creating value.
Yep.
Right. And ideally you won't have both going on. And so you can have a high level of innovation, so you say lots of new ideas, but are they valuable ideas, right? And that often is part of the the testing process as well. Now, what we've been looking at is we're going, well, how do you create the conditions for that in the first place?
Yep.
Right. What are the behaviors? And so the language that you speak in HR is capability,
Yep.
right? What are people capable of, right? And so we have, so as well as the way that we've been looking at this is we assess people when we work with them in two ways. The first way is we use an energy intelligence assessment, which identifies their current capacity versus their potential capacity, which is what they see in themselves, not what someone else sees in themselves, right?
Yep.
And then the second thing that we look at is we look at their innovation potential, essentially, which is by using a positive psychology tool, because we know that there's certain behaviors, observable behaviors in people that are highly correlated to creative outcomes. So curiosity.
Yep.
So if we think about creative people, right? They're curious.
Yep.
They're brave.
Yep.
Right. If you think about any creative person in any agency, they are the bravest person you've ever seen. They put their identity, their value on the line all the time.
Literally
right?
Everything on the line.
Everything.
Yep.
And I think we forget that sometimes.
And they have to fight for it too.
Totally. And I think like this is where we forget about how dangerous that can be too, because if your identity is so closely tied to those things, it can impact you. They seek perspectives, right? This is coming back to that idea of inclusion, inspiring innovation. And I say to people, how many people do you know that are a different gender identity from you, are a different sexual orientation, came from a different socioeconomic background, have a disability, are a different age demographic, because we live in our own little bubbles, and we've got to get out of that. And so when we're approaching a problem, and this is what marketers and creative people do, is we solve problems.
Yep.
You got to think about who's got the most interesting version of that problem. And it's not going to be someone that looks like you.
Yep.
Often.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And then we also know that mood is really, really important. So being enthusiastic is so important about, and whether that enthusiasm is about the problem, it's about the solution, it's about who you're trying to solve it for, it's about the process for some people, doesn't matter. But we know that we're in a positive mood, an optimistic mood, we're much more creative. And then the final thing is really about that, almost like that Steve Jobs quote, right? Our critical thinking, our ability to see all the connections, see all the data, bring together something that's insightful, a belief, a solution to a problem.
Yeah.
Right. And so we're able to identify all those behaviors in an individual and an organization, and then we've created a performance benchmark around that.
Yeah.
So for instance, we know that, and this is where I talk about high potential talent, and actually I believe we can all be high potential, right? Through this, when we think this way. One is high potential people have high capacity.
Yep.
Right. So they've got a lot of gas in the tank.
Yep.
And we know that on average, the top 20% of the over 8,000 people we've assessed will say they have enough energy 81% of the time. Right.
Okay.
Which is really human, right? It's not about being perfectionistic, because that's depleting. As a reformed perfectionist, I can say this, right? So if you have enough energy 8 out of 10 days, life's good.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Like that is a good thing.
That would be the dream for a lot of people.
Absolutely, because the average is only 53%, right?
Okay.
So that's a 42% performance advantage. That's like something you're in a 100-meter sprint, and those high capacity people are already halfway down the track.
Yep.
Right. And they're going to keep going.
Yep.
Whereas you're going to struggle to get there to the 100 meters. And then when we look at these creative behaviors, we know that we've now assessed about 5,000 people through that. We know that the top 20% index at a score of 82, right? And so we can then look at you as an individual and say, where do you compare to those performance benchmarks?
Yep.
Or we can compare a whole organization. But then with that data, we can actually design the right program to get people to that.
For that organization.
We can, for everybody, we can
Mm.
all be high potential. That's what I believe.
Do you get pushbacks from, if you were to pitch this to a company of, let's say, 1,000 people, and if you were to pitch this idea that, hey, on average, it's 40-50%,
Yep.
whereas the top performers are around 80-81%. Do you find, and I'm not playing the devil's advocate because I truly, truly believe in what you're saying, but I'm just wondering if you get pushback from certain business leaders saying, well, maybe it's because those people, not at the top, but people who are depleted, are naturally, and blame it on the biology and the makeup of the person rather than the culture, the all the other external factors in the organization that are leading to that.
Yeah. So, and that's a really good, it's a excellent question, right? It comes back to that, who's responsible for what.
Yep.
Right. So if I was to train you in presentation skills,
Yep.
right, I would do that because I think that's a skill that you need, right, in order to move in your career.
Yep.
Right. I approach it the same way, right? And I go, these are skills that we either don't know. So a lot of people have never ever considered the fact that their relationship with themselves and the fact that they beat themselves up over and over again with their inner critic depletes them, right? Holds them back. But we've never been taught that, right? We've actually never been taught how to be well, ever, you know. And so
not even school,
not in school, right?
Yeah.
And like I joke, the irony with my situation was I spent 16 years in the fitness industry. I knew a lot about the physical side, but I didn't know how these, the other F's essentially were impacting me. And so I had to learn that for myself. But then when you aggregate that and you start to see certain trends, right? So say for instance, if I think about the role of a leader, a leader's job is to provide clarity, right? And we will see that in the data if people don't feel clarity at work, and that's really depleting. It creates a lot of fear for people, it will hold an organization back, and that's the role of the leaders. So based on the data, we can say, well, this is your job as a leader to do this, to close these gaps. This is the job of the individuals to do that. And in a good way with those leaders, actually what I'm saying to them is, guess what? I'm going to take some weight off your shoulders as a leader, right? Because often no HR department I have ever heard of has ever said they're going to take the weight off the shoulders of the leaders. But we do that by enabling their people to take more responsibility for their personal performance. Then a leader can lead. They can be a role model, they can coach, they can set a vision, which is what a great leader should do. And great leaders should leave their people better than they found them. Right. And we can demonstrate that with the data now as well, that you as a leader, if you believe in it, you can do it. And then there will also be, when you take that one step higher and you look at culture, what we believe, coming back to creativity, is that if you can create a culture where creativity thrives, everything else is thriving.
Oh, 100%.
Absolutely everything else is thriving. And so there will be certain employee experiences which I sort of say are heavy hitters, that have a bigger impact on the overall employee experience. So for instance, one of the biggest opportunities I think I'm saying to my clients that they have right now is that what COVID has presented us with is we will never have another opportunity in our careers to re-onboard every employee in a consistent way that enables them to be more well and more creative. Never again will we have this opportunity. And so if we just think about the first day everyone comes back or starts to come back to the office, how within 100 days could every single one of those people be more well and therefore more creative? Right. And the great thing is, like, taking that data, this data-led approach that we do with these performance benchmarks, we can help create a very precise pathway to actually making that a reality.
I mean, creativity, we no one can say creativity is not important. Excuse me. What I tend to see, so if you were to compare a startup versus a big organization, right? a startup, you know, by default is a much smaller organization, and everyone is trying to help each other. There's this environment where you you could be a marketing person, a salesperson, a product development person, a programmer, whatever. But everyone is in this ship together
Hmm.
because you have a goal, and it's much clearer sometimes when you're a small team. And so you'll tend to find that a lot of times in a startup, most people are not in a specific box of a job function, right?
Yeah.
This is what I have to do, and that is it.
Yeah.
And this is, in my opinion, why a lot of the times startups are way much more creative than big organizations, and they move fast, is because everyone contributes to the collective creative power, or most people, I should
Mm.
say. Whereas in a big organization, this is my job description.
Yeah.
This is what I have to
This is
do.
my box.
This is my box.
Hmm.
And so by default, you don't get as much creative output from the entire organization. And creativity becomes just a function or an output that comes from those who are responsible for the creative output.
Yeah. 100%. Right. So what I'll say, like one of the things that we use a framework, employee experience framework that we call the X Factor,
Mm,
EX, for employee experience. And what it does is it connects mental well-being and productivity, creativity and innovation, and emotional intelligence
mm,
and inclusion,
yeah.
right? Because what we've seen is that often there will be a part of the business, like you were saying, is siloed and responsible for that,
Yeah.
right? So there will be an innovation team, and what organizations forget is that when you say that, what you're saying is that every other part of the organization is not
Shuts down.
innovative, right?
Yep. Yep.
The other thing is that, well, I think that big organizations can learn from startups,
Mm,
and this is, I'm sure you're the same as me, is like sometimes, yes, there is a lot of creativity and we'll have big visions,
mm,
right? Often with what we do, I know I'm only just getting started
of course.
with the stuff
Yeah.
that I want to create.
Mm,
Um, However, with limited resources, you only put your energy into the things that create value,
mm,
right? And usually immediately, right? Like
yep.
if it's not going to generate an income in the short term,
Yep.
you know, then often we'll focus there first because cash flow is really important.
Right.
And then once we've got that security, then we'll start to look at other forms of like
Yep.
expressing our creativity.
Mm,
So like I've got a big vision, but I'm in
step.
this. It's a long game,
Yep.
right? Uh, and so in organizations, you see a lot of non-value adding energy
Mm,
wasted.
yep.
I often talk about the fact that, and I feel fine saying this about Telstra, even like it's 5 years since I left now. But I knew that if I felt really strongly about an idea that I was passionate about,
Mm,
I had to prepare myself for 3 months of stakeholder engagement, of walking around with my PowerPoint deck, of making all these people feel heard, right? So that when I wanted to start,
yep.
I would not get barriers in front
Mm,
of me, right?
yep.
Because as you said, people would feel that you were encroaching on their space or
Mm,
whatever, and that is a lot of energy, expensive. I was pretty well paid back then.
yep.
I miss that salary. But that's a third of a year, right, of someone spending on something that
Yep.
actually hasn't created any value. Whereas what we do is we will go out and we'll try and create value as soon as we possibly can.
Mm,
If we've got a new day, we're trying to create value on that idea the next day.
yep.
And that's what's really important. Like we really are working in an agile way, right?
Mm,
And so this is one of the things I always say to when I'm mentoring startups as well is, you can have the big vision, but you've got to break it down first of all, and you've got to focus on putting on value creation,
the
always on
building
value
blocks.
creation.
The building blocks. Yeah. Value creation. Sorry, were you gonna say something?
No,
Yeah.
that's ultimately it, right? You've
Mm,
got to focus on that. Like you got to pay the bills
of
first,
course.
otherwise you're not going to be around for very long.
You touched earlier on like the idea of energy. You either like do things that deplete or add energy to you. And I used to think about this quite a bit with meditation. and because I always try to analyze things. And when you meditate, I'm not like an expert in meditating, but I've tried to meditate over the last 10 years. And at times I had more success. There are times where I used to do it every single day.
Yeah.
That used to work really well for me. And I can see my energy level just going, regardless of what was happening around.
Mhm.
And at times when I'm not doing it on a regular basis and I feel like, oh, okay, life is great now, then that's when I tend to kind of like,
Yeah.
forget about
Yeah,
it.
totally.
um, what I realized is that, and this goes to the point that you mentioned earlier around a lot of times we have these loops and these things in our head, how we talk to ourselves
Mhm.
that deplete us. And if you think about meditation, and I'm sure a lot of meditation gurus who might be watching this might say this is a very simplistic way of looking at meditation. There's a lot more to it. But you can argue that meditation is, in a way, it's just stopping your brain from thinking. Like you're trying as much as possible to not engage in thoughts, right? And so thoughts can be positive or negative in a very simple way. And so you really what you're doing is shutting down your negative thoughts that you tend to have. And I try to do this exercise with myself of looking at meditation and its impact on my energy versus visualization. Because visualization by nature is positive thinking, right? You're visualizing a positive outcome. I want to get this car or I want to get
Yep.
this job, something that you want,
Yep.
and you attribute that this thing when it happens, or that event when it happens, that you're going to be happy. So it's in a way there's a positive thing to it. So, and I wanted to measure the impact of visualization compared to meditation on my energy level, and I found them
Mm.
to be very similar.
Right.
And the common denominator here is removing the negative thoughts. And I find it very fascinating how if you just even when you go through your day and a negative thought or you know critiquing yourself in a negative way tends to creep in, just being able to recognize that when it starts to happen and distracting yourself or thinking about something else or correcting it,
Yep.
how much more energy you can end up with.
100%. Right. And so there's so many things in that. So my experience, right, is that one of the things we've got to remember from a neuroscience point of view, right, is that we have a natural negativity bias that's hardwired into us, right? Natural negativity bias.
Interesting.
And that's why one of like my favorite sayings is that our brains are like magnets for the negative and they're like Teflon for the positive.
Okay.
Right. And that's why we need to practice these positive behaviors.
Mm.
What we also know, though, is that from a neuroscience point of view, is it's basically impossible for your brain to be thinking negatively and positively at the same time.
Okay.
Right. And so if you have these tools,
Yep.
these practices, these hacks to disrupt negative thoughts,
Mm.
that's really important for us to practice.
Mm.
And a lot of people think about meditation, and they think it's a bit fluffy and woo woo and stuff like that. I think that at its essence it's about being present,
Mm.
right, and just being here. And that's
Mm.
what often people struggle with. Is it's hard, right? You're learning a new skill, and if you want to meditate and you want to quiet your brain when your brain is normally really noisy,
Yep.
right, it's going to be hard. So we need to give people little baby steps or ways to access that.
Mm.
And so one of the simplest ways that I like to use with people, and I use this often at the start of my workshops, is I just say, if you just notice something new in this room right now.
Yep.
Right. As soon as you do that, you are present.
Yep.
Right. You're back in the room. Then if you choose, then, so if we're distracted or mind wandering, whatever, our brains love to be distracted, then you can just use that technique to bring yourself back into the room. Then you might focus. Another tool I use is if I'm in my head too much, I try to get into my body.
Yep.
Right. And that might be just by taking one conscious breath.
Yep.
which is, I like it, the square breathing technique, which is
What's
you
that?
breathe in for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4.
Right.
Right. So literally square, like often what I get my clients to do is just on a post-it note, just draw a square shape, put a 4 against each
Yep.
side, and then in the center write the number 90. Just do 90 seconds of square breathing.
Yep.
If you're anxious, if you're overwhelmed, if you're in a back-to-back meetings and you just want to refocus before you go into the next meeting, just do 90 seconds of square breathing. Calms your parasympathetic nervous system.
Yep.
Right. Reduces stress. It's used by elite athletes, used by the
Parasympathetic nervous system. That's something that's a term I know.
Yeah.
Out of all the terms that you mentioned.
Right. So
Yep.
it's like, it's just ways that, and they're things that when we do them, we feel it straight away.
Yep.
Right. And so, another thing that is a really, like, I've used, I had, I went back and saw my psychotherapist last year after a breakup, right? And I was I found myself slipping back into depressive thoughts and stuff like that. And the thing that brought me out of that was practicing gratitude, right? Because when you have this little box of things that you're grateful for, right? Each time you think of those things, then that you're reliving a little moment of joy.
Yep.
And that's why when you talk about visualization, like, we're reliving those moments, we feel those emotions again. Our brains literally light up the same way they would if we were experiencing that for the first time.
Yeah.
And so the science backs all of these things up that we sort of intuitively know.
Yeah.
But it is about, it's really hard, like with any skill, if you don't practice the skill before you need it, right? You don't just get your learner's license and jump out on the road, right? You got to practice to be able to handle traffic and stuff like that before you go out there for the first time.
Of course.
And that's why if we practice all these skills and just find the ones that work for you,
right?
You might not want to have to be, a meditation guru or something like that, but you can find other ways that you can be present that just feel nicer to you or more natural to you.
Yeah.
And then once you get good at those, perhaps you're going to be more interested or curious about, more advanced versions, essentially.
I mean, I totally agree. I've just to follow on that, I've read a few books on the topic. One of them was The Power of Now. It's quite popular.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it. I read it again. I heard it on an audiobook version. These days, I'm quite interested in the neuroscience angle.
Yeah.
And you said something that just blew my mind a minute or two ago, that the science or neuroscience has discovered or believes that by default, we are attuned to think negatively more than positively.
Hardwired.
Hardwired. And it kind of makes sense, because when you look at the general population, you tend to see people who have, for example, your research and the data that you've looked, only, what was it, 20% have 80% energy, whereas the rest, or the average, is 50%.
Yeah.
That just tells you right there. So it kind of makes sense, but it's also very strange when you think about it from a very just objective standpoint. Why are we wired to think more negatively than positively? And is there something to it than what most people know?
It's evolutionary, essentially, right? So if you think about how old the human brain is, it's about 300,000 years old.
Okay.
Right. And if you think about the stresses that we were designed for, we were always it was all about survival, right? So we needed these negative thoughts, essentially, in order to actually attune to our environment and to live, right, protect ourselves. The types of stresses that we're dealing with these days, when you think about it, like, these are only happening in, even for many of us, really, with the last sort of 30 to 40 years, right? So if you think about 30 years versus 300,000 years, the brain's, from an evolutionary perspective, is not going to catch up in that time to this incredible pace of change that we're going through. But the great thing is that we know, again, from the neuroscience, is that our ability to rewire our brain through action, right, and new thoughts and things like that is actually very powerful and can be achieved relatively quickly too.
So
So
it's bad news, but there's a lot of hope, right?
yeah,
Because you're able to rewire
well,
things.
the thing is that it becomes like like one of the things you said before, it's about awareness first,
Yeah.
right? So if I notice that, so say in the instance I was saying last year when I needed some extra help, right? I need
Mm,
some professional help from a psychotherapist because I noticed that these negative thoughts, these ruminations were beyond what I felt like I was equipped with at the time to deal with by myself.
yeah.
And so I needed some extra help.
Mm,
Uh, and so I think this is one thing that we've got to make more common for us, is that
yeah.
it's okay to do that,
Yeah.
right? If you notice, like there is, so Professor Allais that I talked about before, he'll talk about mind wandering,
Mm,
right, is a really important part of the creative process when it's done positively,
mm,
but then we can also mind wander negatively, and then we end up in this tornado of
mm,
negative thoughts and ruminations and things like that. And so we need these tools in our toolkit to be able to pull ourselves out or notice that.
mm,
And so another thing that I use for people just for fun, right, is I'll say, look, you know, we all say stuff to ourselves that we would never say to anyone else,
mm.
right? Where it can be really unkind to ourselves.
Yeah.
One of the first things you can think about is you are the first person you greet every day.
Mm,
Are you kind to yourself the first time you greet yourself in the morning?
yeah.
Right? Just start with little things like that.
Yeah.
If you notice, so one thing, this is from the School of Life as well. The School of Life will talk about how our inner critic started as an outer critic first,
Right.
right? So understanding that often those thoughts are not even your own,
Yeah. How could you have learned them?
right? So it
Yeah.
might have been someone else said that to you or told you something, or we've all got those negative influences in our lives that have
Yeah.
made us feel bad about ourselves in some way.
But it doesn't necessarily have to be, oh, when you were a kid and you were in like middle school, someone told you something. It could be that you see how other people around you, people you hang around the most, how they treat themselves. And that becomes how you treat yourself
Hmm.
or how you talk to yourself.
Yep.
So it could be a behavior that not necessarily driven by how someone treated you, but it could be how, you just picked it up from how other people did to
Absolutely,
themselves.
and it's probably going to be a combination of those things,
Yeah.
right? And so this is where we've got to understand we also choose who we hang around with.
Mm,
We choose who we work for,
yeah.
right? And this is why I always come back to responsibility,
Mm,
right? We are responsible for our lives. We've made certain choices, whether it's who we choose to work with, who we choose to spend our time with, who our partner is,
yeah.
who our friends are. We've
Yeah.
made those choices. And so if you're not happy with something, if you're surrounded by energy vampires,
Yeah.
the only person that can change that is you.
Yeah.
And sometimes those are really hard decisions to make. Sometimes they're things that we need to put in compartments.
Mm,
So I'll say that, for instance, I'll say to people with energy vampires that are people, right? If you can't remove that person from your life, at least make sure that you bookend them. I say bookend them, put something energizing before,
mm,
energizing after you spend time with that person. And at least, even if it's just in your mind, you decrease the importance of a relationship,
mm,
right? So that's you giving them the power. You allow them to be an energy vampire
mm.
as well in your
Yeah.
life. So we've got to think about that. But I do think like a lot of the reasons that people end up being depleted is they're not taking responsibility for the decisions they're making.
Yep. They feel vulnerable, like I'm a victim of. Um, so I've got a question. Something I think about a lot, and I'm not sure, haven't gotten to an outcome or like a conclusion on. Um, so when you look at capabilities and talents and skills, generally, you look at, for example, let's say someone is one of the best soccer players, an NBA star, right? When you analyze achievements and talent, some some of the times it's biological. You can't do anything about it. So, for example, someone who's quite tall is definitely able to make it to the NBA compared to us, for example,
Yep.
right? Um, but it doesn't stop at that. There's a lot more to it, right? Besides what you've been given.
Yeah. It's just as many tall people that are really shit at basketball.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
So when it comes to creativity, how much of it, in your opinion, or in the opinion of science, is what we're given when we were born, and how much is not? And you can see where I'm going
Yeah,
with
yeah.
this, because I feel that one of the things that also shuts down the potential of creativity for most people is the whole idea of, oh, this person is a creative person. When we say the way we talk in our society is, it sounds, a lot of the times it's like creativity is for some people
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and not for everyone
We
else.
don't identify as being creative. So there's some really interesting research on this as well. So a NASA scientist actually did a study where he measured the creativity of kids at 5 years old, right? And then he followed them and keep retesting their creativity up until they were in their 30s, right? As 5-year-olds, 95% of us test at genius level for creativity.
What research is that? Can you remember?
So I
if not, you can just show me the link.
I
That would
can.
be
I'll
great,
send you
because
the
I
link.
can put it.
So
Yeah.
there's a NASA scientist,
Yeah.
and then by the time we get to 30, it's only 2%.
Wow.
Right, and so what that shows, and one of the most watched TED Talks of all time too is around how schools kill creativity by Sir Ken Robinson. What that shows is that not being creative is learned. Right?
Make no mistake.
Yep. No mistake on it. Not being creative is learned. And I actually have seen this actually in the research I did around the high performance benchmarks, because what I've seen in the Australian population is two of the really important behaviors related to creativity, bravery and enthusiasm, are actually very low in Australians. My personal sort of hypothesis on this is that, and this is the same with Kiwis, I'm a Kiwi, but is that we have this thing called the tall poppy syndrome, right? Where, and you're not allowed to sort of be out there and sharing crazy stuff, or you get literally kneecapped, right? You're not allowed to be overly confident. We're allowed to be humorous, right? We're allowed to be funny,
sarcastic.
Like that's actually quite high, right? But these ones are really important for those creative outcomes aren't there, but we can teach them. And actually, if you're lucky enough to send your kids to a positive psychology school, they'll be learning creative education as well as positive education as well as adventure education, because they're all linked, right? And actually driving more creative outcomes for people. But we can still learn those behaviors.
Just to reiterate, 95% at the age of 5, was it?
Yes.
Of kids are creative, geniuses in the creative department.
Yeah.
And at the age of 30, it's only 2%.
That's right.
So for everyone listening who thinks you're not creative, if you think you're not creative, think again.
Yeah.
And I'd love to, because this is going to be on YouTube as well, I'd love to, for anyone who's watching, please put your comments, whether you think, being creative is something you can learn, you can bring back, or whether you think creative is just for certain people. I'd love to know your comments and thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't have a business if I didn't think that I could teach you how to be more creative. But one of the let me demonstrate to you the difference, right? So when they do the test, right? So when you give a kids, say, give them a problem to solve, like say it's a box that only lights up when you put certain shapes in it.
Yep.
Right. What will happen? Adults, given the exact same problem, adults will play around with things, and when they get the answer right the first time, they'll stop.
Right.
They'll be, I've solved it.
There you go.
Right.
Leave me alone.
Kids will keep going, right, to find other ways that they can do it as well. Right. And so that's a way that it's because the measure of creativity, to your point before around Heineken, was actually the number of ways
Yep.
in which you might solve a problem.
Yep. Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And so one of the, the simplest things people will do will be, they'll be like, say you got 5 elements. How many different things can you make out of those 5 elements? Right. Adults will really struggle. Kids will be like heaps.
Yep.
Right. Because they're just not constricted in the same way that adults are.
Yep.
And part of this is also linked back to that neuroscience part, right? So the DMN, which was the divergent neural network, is actually underdeveloped in most of us. The convergent part, which is very task oriented because that's how we learn and do things, is very well developed in most of us. So that's where we focus. So it's about the behaviors, but it's also about the context and conditions, right? So that's why I mentioned that we have to feel safe. And why that's such a big problem often in a lot of corporates is people don't feel safe. They don't trust. They don't have a high level of trust of the organization or of their team to be themselves, which is so important from an inclusion point of view, and therefore you don't get the brains lighting up the way that you want them to.
I've got a couple more questions, and I'm not sure how much time you have. I have all the time. So, is there any link between creativity and sleep, and not just in the sense of how much sleep you get, but the quality of sleep, the pattern of your sleep? So, for example, I'm not sure if that's right person, but one of the geniuses, I think it was Einstein or Newton, they had a very weird sleep pattern.
Right. I'm not sure I remember this one.
I'm not sure. I could be pulling this out of my butt. But I think regardless, there was one of the geniuses who used to sleep for 3 hours, wake up. And when I read that, I was like, is this real? Like, how I couldn't imagine myself sleeping for 3 hours, waking up, ideas, think about things, going back again to sleep for another 2-3 hours and keep doing that. But perhaps there is, but I think more so about, is there a specific time I should go to sleep? Is there, how much quality sleep is there? Should I do certain things before I go to bed?
We could probably do a whole podcast just on sleep. So, so sleep is basically the foundation for both capacity and creativity.
Okay.
Right. So, best TED Talk to watch is Dr. Matthew Walker.
I read a big part of his book.
Yeah. So his book is really heavy going, right? Like I'm like, I wish it had more pictures in it. I was like one chapter at a time, let that digest. And so, but when we break it down, so I'll talk about it first from capacity, and then I'll talk about it from creativity.
Sure.
Right. So capacity is, so the World Health Organization recommendation is we all need 8 hours, right? When it comes to quality of sleep, places to start, right, to get the good quality sleep, what the sleep science will tell us is first it's regularity, right, going to bed at the same time every night. We each have a unique physiological rhythm built into us that tells us what is the best time for us to go to bed, which is called a chronotype. That again is evolutionary, right?
Is this the same as the biological clock?
No, like when I think about biological clock, I think more about women.
Sorry. Well, circadian rhythm. I think.
Circadian rhythm. Okay, so circadian rhythm is so they're the two things that sort of fit together. Okay, so
that's funny.
Circadian rhythm is really the sun going around the Earth, right? So your chronotype is your physiology. It's you internally,
right? Okay,
right, and there's a simple, we'll share this in the links as well. There's a simple free assessment that you can do that helps you identify your natural bedtime. Right. So if you think evolutionary, we're all in villages and forests and stuff like that, tribes. You didn't want all the adults to be alert at the same time. Right. So you got some people that are morning people, some people that are night people, some people that are in between. Right. So there's always someone to protect the tribe. Right. When we're babies, we're all morning people. Teenagers, most of them are night people, right? Which is even why we're starting to see exams shifted later in the day now, because teenagers do not perform well at first thing in the morning. Then as adults, we diverge. As when we become elderly, we come back to being morning people again. Right? Because you're not going to be protecting the village anymore.
Right.
Right. So understanding your chronotype is the place to start. So
Mm.
my chronotype, my natural bedtime is 11:45 p.m. So I try to get
Is when you go to bed?
That's when I go to bed. I try, and I've built my business, my life around my chronotype, right?
Right.
So I don't get up till about 7:45, 8. Then my first 2 hours of the day are protected for me.
Mm.
I try to go to the gym, look after myself, eat well, and then I start work about 10.
Yeah, I'm quite fascinated by like the accuracy. Like you measured it like 11:45, not 11:30 or 12 or 10.
So this chronotype assessment will give you to the nearest 15 minutes, right? And think about, I do want to caveat with all this, and think about this um, as everything is an experiment, right?
Mm.
If you want to get better quality sleep, experiment with different things and
Mm.
just see what happens. Right? If it works, keep it. If it doesn't work, try something different.
Yep.
Um,
Mine is melatonin pills.
so yeah, I if my brain's really going, then I will
Mm.
sometimes take melatonin as well,
Yep.
right? So just think, I've got. It's a bit naughty to say this, but I often say that. So this is from Ariana Huffington. Actually, she'll say
Yep.
nature's natural sleeping tablet is an orgasm,
Yep.
right? And so I say like good
Yep.
3 M's to sleep at night:
Mm.
melatonin, magnesium, masturbation.
For everyone
Right.
who's listening.
Right. That will help.
Yeah.
So, but going to bed at the time is right. The second thing that's really important is the temperature in your bedroom.
Mm.
We need our core body temperature to cool down in order for us to go to sleep and stay asleep. And so,
Mm.
the recommended temperature of your bedroom is 18 to 20 degrees Celsius.
Yep.
Right. So that's why it's easier to sleep in a cool room than
Mm.
a warm room.
Yep.
Okay. So that's sort of where we start in terms of capacity, right, for sleep. And we know that as humans, we can survive longer without food than we can without sleep.
Mm.
Then when we talk about creativity, right, this becomes is really when you start to look at sleep cycles.
Yep.
Right. So a sleep cycle is generally around 90 minutes. You'll have
Mm.
about 5 of them in 8 hours.
Yep.
Right. Within that, you've got different phases of sleep. Your deep sleep, so your deep non-REM and deep REM sleep are really important, but for 2 different reasons. Your deep non-REM is really about when your brain. So if you think about your brain's like a factory, right, and all day it's been working, and it's got waste.
Mm.
In your deep non-REM sleep, it's cleaning out the waste. It's deciding what memories it needs to stay. It's getting rid of like harmful proteins that are linked to things like Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
And so that's a really important phase as well. It's also when we're embedding learning.
Mm.
Right. So often what I'll say to my clients, and this is a little bit controversial too, is I'm like, if you're going to pay for me to come and do a workshop, don't go and get everyone pissed right afterwards, because what we know is that alcohol prevents you going into the deep parts of your sleep. You'll have a shallow sleep and interrupted sleep.
Mm.
The REM sleep is the creative part of our sleep.
Mm.
Right. So this is when our brains are really active, where our imaginations are really active. Our brain lights up.
Mm.
Like almost like the DMM, like very
Yeah.
similar to the DMM that I talked before about divergent thinking, right? So your brain is literally connecting all these things together.
Mm.
It's almost like the science is caught up with the folk wisdom.
Yep.
Right. I'm stealing David's words again here.
Sure.
Right. That we know that if we take a problem to sleep, we'll often wake up with a solution. Right. If we just let our brains do what they're built to do, they will provide the answers. But we've got to create the conditions for them to do that in the first place.
Is that because when you're sleeping, are you referring to finding the solution the next day when you get up?
Yeah.
And would that have been related to maybe getting the solution whilst you were sleeping in a dream, or like even when you get up just in the first few minutes?
So both, right? So one is like often you'll hear a lot of creative people talk about how it came to them in a dream, or a composer saying a melody came to them in a dream. There's also this little, David will talk about this as well, is this golden 10 minutes, right? When you're coming out and your brain waves are still sort of slow, you're just waking up. And if you the DMN sort of whispers, right? It's a good way to think about it. You got to be quiet.
Yeah.
Right. It whispers, you're calm. And, if you've been poking on a lady or something, it'll just come to you. Other ways that it can come to you as well. So sleep is a really important way, but also there's other activities that you can do that activate your DMN and your creativity as well. So for me, I know that when I'm doing exercise, especially if it's like an exercise which is quite repetitive and I don't really have to think too much, like it's not there's no complexity to it. It's almost like that will become an ideas factory for me. Right, your brain's just pumping them out.
So it's almost about shutting down the noise.
It totally is about shutting down the noise, going out for a walk, getting into nature, doing. Actually, one of the best things to think about is, so shutting down is to get into your senses in some way, right? So, and this is again a mindfulness practice, being present, right? Get into your senses. Are you using your hands? Are you getting outside in nature and just noticing the smells? Are you getting into the details that you might see around you? All of those little things mean that you're going to be really present and you're just acknowledging those senses. And then that just creates that sense of calm that allows your DMN to light up.
That brings me to a question that I have. It's a bit of a philosophical question. Because as much as I love science,
gonna get DNM,
and I'm a huge believer of data and looking at things from a scientific standpoint, I also have admiration for philosophy. I'm not, really into like reading all about it, but I like to think in a philosophical standpoint, like from a philosophical perspective as well. So you're like, where's he going there? Why is he going there? What is creativity? And do you think that creativity is some form of tapping into this other dimension, if you want to call it that, or a different world? Like when you shut down everything, you're able to connect to a different realm that exists? Or is it just like Steve Jobs was saying, you're connecting certain things and your mind, your cognitive functions are able to recall them all together and put things together? Is there more to it than what science says, or is there more to it than what we just understand, in your opinion?
I do. I definitely believe that, right? I think that you can rationalize things. When we think about, like, I think creativity is like one of our highest forms of intelligence, right? And if you think about where intelligence comes from, actually we've got neurons in our heart and our gut and our brains. Right. And I talk about, so energy intelligence, right, is what I say is that energy intelligence is turning our intuition around how we feel into data. Right. So we might never have thought, or we would have felt, right? So that's why people find it so easy to answer the questions when we ask them, but we've not really connected dots around that. There's another guy that I know called Craig Wilson, who's written a book called Intuition, and he will say the heart feels, the gut knows, and then the brain tries to figure out how they both know those things, right? And often we'll trying to create this narrative as well around these things. We're trying to make sense of stuff, and sometimes we just know, right? And sometimes we don't. Sometimes you don't need to know why you know. Like, that's what I believe. Like, you can spend a whole lot of energy trying to figure out what you just know.
Don't try to dig in, Rani.
Right? Like, and this is where, like, we because we feel stuff like it, and energy is contagious, and I feel like creativity can be contagious as well. Like, when you get people together, they feel safe together. They can bounce things off. They can share their craziest ideas. They can be really brave, really vulnerable. Like, all that stuff sort of magically happens. So I do think like it's one of our highest forms of sort of wisdom, I guess, and intelligence. And it's sort of sad, when we look at that research from NASA, where it's sort of been beat out of us in a way. What we know, and this is what, so if we're connecting again back to innovation and neuroscience and the DMN and creativity as well, is that, if you are in your DMN, then you are feeling safe. You are being probably your most authentic version of yourself. Right? Because I'm not sure if you've heard of the difference between character and persona, right? So persona is essentially the layer, the mask that we put over our true character,
right?
Because we don't feel safe. right?
Okay.
We feel we have to be a different
It's the
version.
facade.
Yeah, it's a facade, right?
Yeah.
And the energy the thicker that facade, the thicker that persona, the more energy it takes,
Right.
right, to maintain that. Okay,
Exactly.
and so when we
Interesting.
are in our most authentic version of
Mm.
ourselves, when we feel safe, our DMN is activated, we can be most creative as well.
Very, very, very interesting. Um, are there anything you think we haven't covered that you would have liked to cover?
Well, the one thing I want to finish on is I think that what most people want in these conversations is how do I do this for myself?
Yep.
Right? As I said, we can all be high potential.
Yep.
Right? We can all learn these skills. It's just that we've never been taught them.
Yep.
Right? And so the ways that we've been looking, if we want to be successful in this, there's three things that are required.
Yep.
The first is we need context.
Yep.
Right? You need to know where you're at versus where you want to be, and you need to know why you want to get there, like an emotional, visceral reason why you want to have more energy at its most simplest. Right? What do you want that energy for?
What does it mean to you to have it?
Yeah, like how will your life be different? So if you've only got energy 50% of the time, and you could have it at 80%, how would your life be different, right? And why is that important to you? So that context part's really important to think about. The way that we help people do that is we have those assessments, right? They help you ask you the right questions, essentially, because some of those questions you don't know because you're just not aware, right? Never thought. You don't know what you don't know. The second thing is we need to build competence, right? So once we know where we're at versus where we want to be, we need to be competent in the skills that enable us to be more energized and more creative. And those are very simple micro skills, but we need to practice them. And I say competency because you don't have to be a nutritionist or a dietitian or an athlete, right, to eat well or to move. You know, you don't need to be a neuroscientist to know how to light up your brain. We just need competency. We don't need mastery. And then the third thing that we need is we need community, right? We got to do this together. We've got to help each other. And one of the simplest ways we do that is we support each other and we hold each other accountable. So if you want to do this work, do it with someone who, because you'll be doing it together, you can help each other, but you can also do the tough love thing and you can say, hey, you said you were going to do this. Did you do it? And what we know is that you're 95% more likely to succeed if you ask someone to hold you accountable. Right. And so that's the way that we build all of our programs, with those three things, with context, competency, community. And the way that we are offering those to people is you can either do them with your organization, essentially, which is a mixture of group experiences and then an individual program that's delivered through a virtual coach. And that's the thing that I'm most excited about is our virtual coaches is about to come out. And what it does is, because what I believe, right, this is the whole reason I do everything I do, is I'm paying forward my privilege. We talked about before, right? I've been so privileged to have had amazing leadership development, to have had psychotherapists, lots of different therapy, actually. And all I do is pay forward all those little moments where I went, this was the first place to start, because that's the hardest thing for all of us, is where do I start? Because if we think about well-being just in general, it's overwhelming, right? Where do I start? What's the most important thing?
And it gets neglected most of the time.
Totally. We put ourselves last all the time, right? And it's not selfish to look after yourself and to charge your batteries, because you will be much better for the people that you care about the most. And that might be the why that you do it, right? And so what I say is like, keep an eye out, because our virtual coach, we're going to be launching that. What that will mean is that you will have, we say it's the coach, it's called Frankie. Frankie's the coach that everybody deserves. Everybody deserves a coach, and it shouldn't be a financial barrier to do that. And so that's what we're aiming to do, is make this very, very accessible to as many people as possible. Frankie will be able to deliver over 5.7 million unique programs. So it's as a unique experience as you are as an individual, but with these very simple energy intelligence skills.
So I'm not following. Frankie is
the coach, the name of the coach.
Okay. All right. So he'll be delivering that online via tutorials or even like live streams or things like that. Okay.
So Frankie's a they to start with. So Frankie's non-binary. So the way it works is Frankie will take you through a little assessment. based on that, your assessment, your own results, where you're at versus where you want to be. That's the context part.
Yep.
Frankie will then design, using the algorithm that we built, a personalized coaching curriculum for you.
Okay, cool.
And then those coaching sessions are delivered by me, essentially. Where I am sort of there, and the coaching sessions are literally only 4 to 6 minutes long.
Sure.
Because we know everyone the capacity is low, right?
Yeah.
Our ability to find things, and then we coach you on the skill. We get you working on that skill in that 4 to 6 minutes is straight away. And then Frankie supports you to embed that skill by just nudging you in these challenges, essentially throughout that. And so each time it's like basically 100-day coaching program that's designed just for you.
Right. And this is an ongoing subscription type of situation where
actually I don't want to be one of those brands. Two things. I don't want to be a brand that sucks time away from you.
Sure.
Right. So the way we've designed this is that what's the minimum amount of time that's required to help you be more well, right? Which we believe is literally only 4 to 6 minutes in a coaching session, and then maybe another 10 minutes a fortnight. Right. It's that simple, that practical. Then we don't want to be like, I don't know if you've had this as well, you know, you subscribe to something and then suddenly you get charged again a year later and you've completely forgotten about it. You've never used it, you know, and we don't want to be one of those brands either. And so it's always about achieving a result within 100 days. And that's what you're buying. It's not this ongoing subscription.
Amazing.
You know, how we hold ourselves accountable is that you will do your assessment again at the end of the program, so that we can measure your progress. We can say, here's how you sustain your momentum. And then if you choose that there's some other things, because in that 100 days, we actually only get you to work on 6 things, because that's a lot, that's enough.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And then if through the second assessment, we say, okay, here's the next things that you might be interested in learning because you're ready now, then you could choose to do another program.
Sure.
But it's never going to be this like, set and forget thing, which I just think ethically is not right for me.
Of course, totally agree. So this will be ready in the beginning of 2021.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So maybe we'll share some information about it when it's ready.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think we spent about, so this is an hour and a half.
Is it? All right.
Wow. The longest that I've done so far.
Right.
This is the 9th episode. Has been an hour and 10 minutes. So we're trending upwards.
We definitely covered a lot. So yeah, thanks for.
Oh man, it's been a pleasure.
For an invigorating conversation.
Oh dude, there are a couple of moments where I was like, damn. Okay, this is obviously the entire 90-minute has been amazing, but a couple of moments where I was like, Jesus, this is really interesting and new. And I'm sure everyone who's watching will get value from it. I hope, because I did. And yeah, I mean, I'd love to do another one maybe in a month's time if you have time to cover other things, because I'm sure there's a lot of other things that we can cover.
Absolutely. Yeah, we might go deeper.
I'm not trying to get a yes right now, but I'm just saying.
Yeah, well, it could be things that it could be interesting just to see what the feedback is on this one as well. If there's anything that people are interested in going deeper on, I'm happy to do that, because the way that I sort of come back to things is like, how do we make things so accessible, so practical, so that as soon as we teach you, you can immediately implement it. And you know, one of the big promises that I try to make with all my programs is that none of what I teach people requires them more time. It's about just integrating these new behaviors essentially into the things that you're already doing. You're already sleeping. Just go to bed at this time. Right? Like, it's that sort of stuff is where we try to focus, because I think that what people often find themselves in, the tension that they find themselves when it comes to looking after themselves, is it feels like they've got to steal time from somewhere else for self-care. And we don't think that needs to be the case. So, but if there's, and this is why everything is really accessible to start with, but if there's anything that people are interested in going deeper on, this is what I think. It's always like, you know, to start with nutrition, you might, it's just, often it's just about eating more vegetables. next time you can talk about gut biome or, sustainable farming, whatever it is that you get curious on after that.
Yeah. Or what sort of role models we should bring on.
Yeah, exactly.
Everyone watching, if you enjoyed it, please give us a subscribe on YouTube. We're just starting out, so that will be quite helpful. And yeah, thank you so much, man. I appreciate
Thanks,
it.
mate. That was fun.